Hi, everyone. I'm Keira Sorrells, and this is NICUnity. NICUnity is NICU Parent Network's all-encompassing educational initiative to foster a culture of belonging for all members of our community. This initiative is made possible by the generous support of Chiesi USA. Chiesi is a privately owned, research-focused pharmaceutical company committed to infant care for over 3 decades. As a sustainable company accredited with both a B Corp and a benefit corporation status, Chiesi tries to make an impact through forward-looking and impactful initiatives that benefit patients, patient families, providers, and healthcare organizations. Chiesi recognizes and appreciates the vital role that patient families play in the care of babies in the NICU and is proud to support our community. You can learn more at their patient education website, www.NICUconnections.com. So our monthly schedule of NICUnity offerings includes discussions, members-only leadership lounges, and special health topic webinars that bring about diverse experiences in the NICU and beyond. We really are very intentional in our effort to shine a light on those who are often marginalized, silenced, and underestimated. And we are thrilled to provide this platform for those raw, authentic conversations. So I want to thank you for joining us as we embark on this journey of learning, growth, and unity. Together, we will build a stronger, more inclusive NICU community, one conversation at a time. In today's episode, we're talking all about family presence in the NICU. We're going to look at why it is absolutely essential that we make every effort to ensure families are in the NICU, how babies and families are impacted when they're separated, what barriers exist that prevent this from happening, and what we can do as a community to advance efforts to overcome those barriers. I am delighted to be here with my co-host, Gigi Khonyongwa-Fernandez. Gigi, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's so great to see your face. It's been a little while.
Yes, I'm really, really happy to be here, and I'm excited to hear about this topic. I think it's such an incredibly important one, and one that we can't speak about too much. Too much. We need to continuously be talking about it over and over again. And so I'm thrilled to hear what our guest speakers have to say about it and joining that conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. So speaking of our guest speakers, we are joined today by Kerri Machut, who is an academic neonatologist and is passionate about supporting infants and their families on their NICU journeys, both directly and through research and initiatives focused on improving family-centered care. Kerri leads various initiatives in family-centered care, both locally at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago and nationally. She also co-chairs the Family Centered Care Task Force's Advocacy Committee alongside our other guest, Nicole Nyberg. And I'm going to apologize. I don't know if you guys can hear that awful noise, but they are installing gutters on my house, and they decided to work right outside my office just now. So, Gigi, you might just have to take over this conversation.
Yeah, we don't have anything over here at the moment.
Oh my goodness gracious. So I apologize. We'll see what we can do in editing for the recording, but for those watching live, I apologize. But our next guest is Nicole Nyberg, and Nicole is a neonatal nurse practitioner and clinical product specialist at Angel Eye Health. She's also the CEO and founder of Empowering NICU Parents. NICU had her own son at 23 weeks, and since that time, in addition to her clinical work, has devoted her efforts to educate and empower NICU parents on the positive effects of parental engagement and family integrated care. After her son's NICU journey, she became acutely aware of this vital link between parental involvement and kangaroo care with infant and parental well-being. And witnessing the positive impact firsthand, it has become Nicole's mission to spread this evidence-based insight and to empower both families and caregivers to support those families. So thank you so much, Nicole and Kerri, for being here. I'm so happy to have you guys with us today.
Thank you for having us. We're excited.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great topic, and certainly as members of the FCC task force and providers at the bedside, I'm just really looking forward to this discussion. So let's kind of start at the beginning for anybody who is maybe new to this space. Maybe there are new parents that are listening. Maybe there are new physicians or nurses that are listening. As healthcare professionals who take care of sick and premature newborns, can you share with us kind of what is happening biologically to the baby at this stage in their growth and how that family presence promotes positive outcomes?
Sure. Well, just to be perfectly frank, there's a lot happening to babies' brain development. I think many people are pretty familiar with the fact that this is a really crucial window for infants. And I think it's even more important, especially when infants are facing some sort of health challenge, which, somewhat by definition, if an infant is in the NICU, they're undergoing some degree of medical condition, although obviously there's a spectrum. And so for a baby that's born premature, this is extremely important because all of that brain development that would have potentially happened inside the uterus in a dark and quiet or muffled environment is now disrupted, and infants are being cared for in an environment that is much louder and noisier and has a lot more disruptions. Even the tactile development that can influence the pathways and the nerve developments that impact brain development are all altered, right, through things like painful stimuli. So if an infant has to get poked and for various lab tests, or if they have to have an IV placed, all of those sensations, even being moved by hands, again, for a small infant that may only be, say, a pound or something, that's a very atypical experience compared to what naturally may be occurring if they were inside the uterus and just floating in the bag of amniotic fluid. So all of those inputs in the sensory system can impact the pathways of brain development. For a term infant, these things are still crucial. And again, many term infants have very significant health conditions that they may face, and they still may experience those same pain pathways. A lot of times the conditions that may land a term infant in the NICU have some degree of inflammation. So it may be some surgical condition or some infectious condition. And all of those can actually disrupt all of the biochemical pathways and the inflammatory cascade that occurs in the body. That can also have important implications on brain and nerve development. So for a variety of reasons, those medical conditions even exacerbate the kind of natural development challenges that a baby may have in these environments. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. Absolutely. I think that was one thing as a NICU parent, I didn't really consider until later were all those instances of something happening to my baby that really wasn't supposed to be happening at that time in their gestation, right? The ET tubes and the pokes and just all of that negative stimuli. It's not supposed to be happening then. So
Right.
Nicole, what do you have to add about? Or I'm sorry, go ahead, Kerri.
No, go ahead. And maybe Nicole will talk about this, but just to answer the other part of your question about the parent presence and specifically that piece of brain development.
Yeah, so I mean, just to piggyback off of Kerri, talking about the touch, and obviously, we try to educate parents on their good touch. I mean, we want them to touch the baby. We try to teach them or educate them how to do that in the right way with containment and obviously the kangaroo care. So, there's positive touch, there's negative touch, but those parents, the nurses obviously have to do procedures. They also do the positive, but that's one thing that parents can do is actually help with containment and provide that positive touch, because the babies know that. They know that they need that to continue to develop their brain. And research, has shown obviously all of the positive benefits of parental engagement and their presence being there. It helps build parental confidence. It helps once they're engaged and they actually feel more confident in how to care for their baby. But then most importantly, that parent-infant attachment, we know that has great impacts on the baby's long-term developmental outcome, as well as the parents and the family as a whole. And specifically, kangaroo care, we know just how great the benefits are, obviously, for the baby. There's, the physiological, but then also that attachment. component, but it also, helps with the parents. It helps, lift their mood. It helps with milk production. There's just so many positive things about it. And so, part of the reason that, again, I am so, engaged in this is my colleague Jaylee Hillier and I, we recently did the study that looked at what happened when parents were forced out during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's eventually what, Kerri and I kind of hooked up then. And, she kind of shared with me some things, but, we know these parents were terribly traumatized by having to be forced to be away from their baby. And, the babies suffered too, because the parents were not there for that attachment and bonding. And sadly, I think we'll learn more, but we do not know the long-term impact of that. And, these poor babies and family too, for their mental health, how that impacted them in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think, thank you to both of you. And I was just thinking, as both of you were speaking about the concept of continuum, and how that continuum is severely disrupted when you are in the NICU, no matter if you're there for a short time or a long time. And I love what the two of you talked about was the type of touch, and what imprint are we putting on that brain as that brain is developing. So thank you for bringing that up. And I guess we were just wondering too, then what are sort of, I guess, some of the positive impacts that you kind of alluded to this a second ago, Nicole, the positive impacts on babies and families when they are able to be together as much as they possibly can.
I mean, that's what is so, that's why it's so important, because even though I highlighted some of the negative consequences to having a NICU condition for infants, the parent presence is so protective in so many ways. I mean, first of all, as you mentioned, development is a continuum and a spectrum, and there are so many great opportunities for all sorts of different inputs to reduce impact of negative stimuli over time, right? I mean, development continues throughout childhood. There are many things, everything from math tutoring in 7th grade, right? That still has a developmental impact that can impact a child or a person's trajectory and how they ultimately do in school. But to start, obviously, with what we're talking about here in the infant environment, having that parent there matters a lot. As Nicole highlighted, skin to skin care. So that physical proximity and that physical touch, that infant feeling secure, that infant smelling their parent and having that sensory input, the infant hearing their parent's voice and having that reinforced positive input, all of those things matter. But it also matters because then the parent is there participating in care. Like, they are the ones feeding the baby, and they are the ones that then maybe, if they're choosing to breastfeed, are able to increase their milk supply. And then they're learning care. So if a baby does need to go home with additional medical care, whether it's medication or equipment, or even just extra follow-up visits with subspecialists, which many NICU infants do, those parents are becoming well-versed in those medical aspects of their baby's care, because they will be the ultimate, and they're already the ultimate caregiver, but they will continue to be the ultimate medical caregiver, even in a home environment, even though nobody wants to be in that position, but they have to be feel secure and confident in their ability to continue to provide any needed care that child needs. And so if a parent is present, they're able to really build on those skills in a much stronger way that is going to impact both their care of the child, but also their own ability to feel confident throughout infancy and childhood. Nicole had also mentioned the mental health piece. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit more.
I was just going to jump in real. Oh, I think Nicole's having a couple little internet issues at the moment, but I just wanted, something that just came to mind when you were talking was how scared I was as a parent to touch my babies. And I'm sure you both, as healthcare professionals, have come across many parents who were scared. And one of the things that I learned, because of the nurses and physicians, and that I would tell future parents that I was doing peer-to-peer support from, is that, think about your own life. When you get a hug from your mom or your dad, it's pretty different than if you get a hug from your doctor, right? I mean, it's just, and so I just tried to say, look, it's, it's the same thing. Your touch is very different from that of the doctors, no matter how gentle and wonderful the doctor is or the nurse is, it's going to feel different. And like you said, that's Kerri, it's that that sense of safety and that sense of security that, I mean, I think we all search for as humans, but particularly as babies and children.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think even to think about the care that a parent provides is just going to be different. I mean, we have wonderful nurses, right? And physical therapists and everybody that works in the NICU, everybody is really there for the right reasons, I believe. And,
absolutely,
I also believe care deeply about the child that's in front of them and want to give that child everything they can. But the nurses are busy and actually, some of them I often walk by and they are reading to their babies, right? But that's not necessarily something that is always possible versus that the parent is able to be present. A parent is much more likely to open a book and spend that time reading to a child. And again, we even have programs where our medical students come and volunteer and read in the NICU. But again, those types of things of reading can actually make a big difference, right? There's just one example of how things can impact developmental trajectories over time.
And it's something there then about the awareness of it, because it's we all know that that works. We know that that's important. And one of you, I can't remember which one, talked about the atypicalness of it. And so all of what we're talking about now, the atypical touch, and I like when Nicole said about, we're trying to, in some ways, you are giving that power back, because as parents, you are, your power has been totally ripped apart. And so everything that was quote unquote normal, or what you thought was normal, no longer exists. And so you don't know. You just in this sort of bit of a shock moment. So I guess I was just wondering, so why are we still here? Why, if we know that it's important and we know the incredible impact. I mean, there's so many studies, that's happened globally that shows that this is incredibly important. Why do you feel it's such, both of you, still a fight? I don't know if that's the correct word, but it feels like there's a bit of a, sort of resistance to, to getting babies and families back to that as much as possible, that normal or typical state that they need to be in, that we know that we can mitigate a lot of morbidity issues, a lot of, mortality issues with that. So what are some of your thoughts around what's causing some of that resistance?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Nicole.
No, you first.
Part of it is just a lot of times, sadly, the culture of the unit. There are some units that perhaps haven't been fully educated, or don't fully understand all of the benefits that we were just discussing. And nurses and physical therapists and everybody, I mean, myself included, when you're going into work and you're doing it day after day, it's your task, it's where you work. And so unfortunately, it's sometimes, they forget how important the parental role is and how important it is to involve those families. And not only, obviously for the benefit of the baby, but the parents too, because they have that altered parental role. They don't feel like parents. So we have to be able to include them. And, there are sadly, still some units that have parents step out during rounds, or they have them step out while they're hanging IV fluids. And it's, I think a lot of it's education, and it's just trying to get, somebody or someone in there to really, really talk about the positive impacts of parents. And, again, probably why we are involved in the Family Centered Care Task Force is because, there just are, not every unit, there's no unit that's perfect, but there's some that are definitely practicing more than others.
And I'll jump in because, at least for me, Nicole is frozen at the moment. Nicole, please jump in if you come back to it. And I would add to that it's a culture issue a lot of times. And I think there is this, bias is maybe a strong word, or belief that providing this family-centered care is going to be a burden or take more time, because it sometimes does, right? To sit and spend the time with a family that's upset, or to explain a child's condition, or to seek that parent's insight about what the right next step is for that baby. That all does take a little bit more time, but really studies have actually shown that the benefits far outweigh that time. That in the end, if you communicate better up front, if you build that trust with the family up front, that it's going to actually save you time in the long run. Where, I think we've all unfortunately been in situations, early as I have, where you come to a family that has had a lot of mistrust or skepticism and lost faith in the healthcare team, and to regain that back takes a lot of time. Or if a family hasn't understood something up front, that's harder to teach them something, when you need to like teach them something about home equipment and things like that in the long run. There is also studies that show it actually brings a lot more joy in practice. So in terms of nurses and physicians, that this is, we're humans. We go into this type of work, most of us, for the relationships, right, and that connection. And though, again, as Nicole highlighted, this is our job, and sometimes it's task oriented, and sometimes we are tired and burned out, but ultimately this can actually help ameliorate a lot of that, because it's so wonderful to be able to make that deeper connection with a family and with a child. I also think, aside from like the direct contact at the bedside, the institutional policies are not always that helpful and supportive. Even if the policies get changed, though, it still is just, there's got to be so many other resources that get devoted to it, and it's just and unfortunately, it's not always a priority for institutions. So because this is at the end of the day, this is not something that generates revenue, this type of work, right? And so it's hard. I do a lot of this work at Lurie, and although it's always recognized very favorably and people are open and receptive to it, this is not part of my job description, right? And it's not, I don't get any sort of time accounted for this work. I don't get any sort of additional resources or necessarily support. Other than people engaging with me on it, but it's not like somebody says, "Oh, this is your job. You're the director of family engagement." Now, there are people in the institution that do, but even though this is such a passion of mine and colleagues that are in the same space as me at Lurie and at other hospitals, many of us are doing this kind of on our own volunteer time, in addition to our main job of taking care of patients. And it's just, it hasn't risen to the level of priority, kind of despite the data, unfortunately.
So, Nicole, I wanted to ask you, because you obviously you were already an NNP, correct, before you had your son, is that right? And so how did your practice change, or your perception changed, once you had your son?
It changed, I think, in every possible way that it could. I was on orientation hospital as an NNP, so I had just moved and was just starting to practice as an NNP. But I had been a NICU nurse for 11 or 12 years prior to that, and I don't, once I was on the other side, I became acutely aware of ways that I should have been so much better, and ways that is now going to be changed forever, and how parents and families, and just making sure that they're involved and they're educated. I just opened my eyes in so many ways just to understand where parents are, because you don't know until you've been there. And I just didn't, fully appreciate it. So it's, something, like I said, I think anybody that has a baby in the NICU, they're changed, but it changed me both personally and professionally in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important for that culture shift you're sort of talking about, Kerri and Nicole. It's either having that lived experience, because you can't teach that. That's not in any book. But it's also having that empathy, which is very different from sympathy. And empathy is, I'm walking with you, and sort of understanding that, yes, it may take a few moments, but the long run is going to be really, really important. But it's interesting when you were talking about the kind of outcome, Kerri, about the sort of monetary outcome, and it's sort of, and I think these kind of discussions will assist that in flipping that narrative and understanding that we are all together as a team. Because if you don't have the babies, you don't have a job. I mean, if you don't have, in the sense of, and in the sense, not in a negative way, but it's just like we're working together collectively as a team. And if in the long run, if we're not empowering parents, if we're not training them, I love what you talked about, Nicole, about like, educating them and training them and putting, giving them that information they need in order to take care of their children, then from a cost perspective, we're going to pay anyway, because they're going to come back. We're going to have repeat admissions. We're going to have all these other things. We're going to have, mental health breakdowns, all those things. And so it's something about being able to step back and look at the big picture in a way, and then seeing how families are team members, are active team members, and how that mitigates a lot of the negatives, but also increasingly improve a lot of the positives.
Yeah, and I think you made an excellent point that one area I think that will hopefully help continue to turn this conversation is trying to better demonstrate that link more objectively. And again, I hate to talk about money because it's not why any of us are here, I'm sure, on this call. But again,
right,
the leaders that run these institutions, I think those kinds of things respond to. And not only is it things about like being readmitted, and that has a cost savings aside from the bigger point of like keeping the child healthy and the family sane, and at home, but even things like not building that trust with a family while they're in the unit really impacts your ability to deliver care. And I witnessed this firsthand. If a family doesn't trust us, they are not going to trust my recommendation when it comes time to say, your baby is still growing and developing, but they're going to need longer time to be able to gain their feeding skills, right? And this is a common conversation that comes up. Again, we are very optimistic that all children are going to be able to eat healthily and normally in the long run, but a lot of children need support throughout infancy and often need that, or not often, but sometimes need that support to continue at home with a feeding tube. And that is a hard discussion to have with families, understandably so, because nobody wants that for their child, right? Even though they want their child to get home and to be as healthy and as nutritionally nourished as possible. But if a family doesn't trust me because I haven't spent that time with them, they're not going to trust that recommendation. And then that baby is going to need to stay in the hospital longer while we're trying to sort this out, right? And so that also keeps that family separated longer than they may need to be. It keeps the baby in the hospital where they continue to gain, or experience other risks and things like that. So building that trust can even shorten the actual time that a baby may need to stay in the hospital if we can get it right from the beginning.
Looks like we got Nicole back.
I'm so sorry. It was the one day I decided to go out. My apologies.
I know. It is absolutely fine. So I didn't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add about, the way your practice or perception changed based on before and after, and really what has led you to do the study that you and Jaylee did, and then the work that you're doing with the FCC task force. I mean, this certainly has become an increased level of passion of yours, for sure.
Yes, definitely. I think again with NPN, this, that there's NICU parents, once they go through it, it's really, really difficult not to be changed and to feel the passion to want to do more and to help other NICU families, because we now understand it and never wanted to be there, but it's a very strong community to be a part of. And so I, again, with empowering NICU parents, just wanted to be able to educate and empower parents. I feel like, again, when they're educated and when they are physically present, it obviously helps, like I said, with the commitment, the confidence and their ability to be engaged and, to transition that, make that transition home so much smoother when they're involved in, just like I think Kerri was speaking to, when the parents trust you but yet they're involved and they understand how to take care of their baby, then they will actually get home sooner. So did that. And then, Jaylee and I, like I said, I was practicing when the pandemic hit and tried to help so many families. But as Kerri knows, our hands were tied in regards to the CDC and what their recommendations were. And it was painfully difficult to practice and to see these parents struggle, not having their significant other there with them when they were doing kangaroo care. They never got a family picture until the baby came home. And when Jaylee and I looked into the parents' responses and how this mentally impacted them, it's significant. And it's heartbreaking to hear what they went through, and I can't imagine being forced to be away from my baby. I mean, my husband tried just to get me to leave to go to dinner, and I threw a fit. So, when they could only visit for a couple hours, or there was one mom, they had twins. And so the mom had to visit one twin, the dad could visit the other. Well, the twin was in the process of passing away. They would not let the mother go see the other twin during that process. I could cry just thinking about it. So just cruel things. And, again, Gigi was talking about the empathy. I get it. And so I really, really felt for those families. And, I know the importance of kangaroo care and involvement, because with my son, we did kangaroo care once I was able to hold him when he was 5 days old. We did kangaroo care I did it for 3 to 6 hours a day, and my husband did it as well. And I firmly know that, my ability to be there and to help with his care and to do kangaroo care and all those things significantly helped him with his outcome and where we are today.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was just going to add, I don't actually know if I even mentioned this to you before the talk, but my oldest daughter was actually in the NICU just for 2 weeks, and she was very stable. She was full term, but she had an infection and needed IV antibiotics for 2 weeks. So we were there, but because she was my first, and because she was born at the Children's Hospital, I was still in my pediatric residency at the time. And because she was so stable, they were able to transfer her outside of the main NICU to their step down unit, which was in a children's hospital, a regular hospital room. So it had its own bathroom and had a pull out couch. And because she was my first, and this hospital was 45 minutes from where we live, my husband and I just moved in. So I never left her side except for 3 hours one day when we drove home to get clothes, because we were not expecting this. But we were both able to stay there. I mean, my husband ended up working a couple of the days, but for the most part, he even was able to be off that first week. And that was all I knew. I mean, again, I hadn't even started my neonatology training, and I was like, oh, this is the NICU. You can just be with your baby. Again, I didn't have the barriers that a lot of families have with transportation and work and having to go back. And I didn't have other kids or even a dog to take care of back home. So I was very lucky to have that experience, and then quickly learned that is far from typical for most families going to the NICU. But I think that's part of why I also feel so strongly about this issue, is I know how it can be in the most perfect world, right? Which is just not, unfortunately, a reality in our society, aside from hospital policies and all the other things. And we can talk about that more later too. But so that is a little bit of what spurred me on to doing this work in general. And then I was at a conference, the Gravens conference 2 years ago. Last year? Was it just? No, it had to have been. I can't remember now. Last year or the year before, Nicole. Maybe it was just last year. And I heard her presentation, and it was so compelling that I went up to her after the talk, and I was like, we've got to fix this. And that's kind of what started a lot of our work within the task force on this particular topic.
Yeah. It's a good. I'm so thankful that both of you shared your personal stories, because I think that's always quite important, and feeds into that empathy piece. And I was just wondering, and you started talking about it, Kerri, about some of the barriers, and we're just given the fact that a large percentage of people who are in the NICU are already in the marginalized group communities, and I love what Keira says, the underestimated communities. And so what other barriers, you sort of start talking about it, what other barriers do you both see with those communities where that maybe are additional barriers that they are having to face with access to their babies?
This is the biggest topic, and it's one of the most important. There's a lot of concrete barriers, right? So a lot of families that are in the NICU, because of things like historic racism and lack of access to care already are at higher risk to having a baby be sick and be in the NICU. And then that kind of begets additional barriers and challenges while the family that already lands them in the NICU, but then while they're in the NICU faces additional challenges. So we have families that may be struggling financially. They may be struggling to have a job at baseline, and then they now have to also be trying to care for their child in the NICU or undergoing the stress of having a child in the NICU, and it makes it harder for them to be able to continue employment. We have many families that end up having to lose their jobs while they're in the NICU environment. And then that creates a huge additional stress on a family. That then creates barriers for them to be present in the NICU, right? Because again, they're dealing with the stress and the trauma of that, and also trying to maybe maintain jobs or look for jobs, but then may not have the finances they need to be able to get to the hospital just by things of like transportation or being able to pay for childcare for their other children. They're huge barriers. We see them all the time. I mean, I can still recall an unexpected death that I had, and the baby unfortunately passed away kind of throughout the course of the day. And the mom was there. However, she was there alone, and she was trying to get her sister to come, and her sister's like, I don't have gas money to get to the hospital. I mean, this is a child, her nephew was dying. And in the end, we were able to support the family, but like, this is where they're starting from, right? And it just, it's not just like, oh, let me just hop in the car and get there. Oh, let me just take a cab and get there. These are the realities that are, that really have huge barriers for our families. Distance from hospital, and whether it's because you might live only 4 miles from the hospital, but you rely on public transportation, and that means 2 buses and a subway, or whether it's you don't have access to care because you live in a part of a state that doesn't have access to a higher level NICU, and your baby has to be transported, and now you're hours from your child, and may not be able to stay physically in that city where the child is because you're also, again, raising other children or have to be able to maintain a job or whatever else is going on, obviously, in your everyday life. But because there are huge geographic discrepancies across our country in which areas have higher resources of subspecialty care that children in NICUs provide. I think a lot of our marginalized communities have huge mistrust of the medical system, and so they don't feel welcome in the NICU. And I think this is, again, part of the culture that is unfortunately prevalent in some. There is not representation potentially on the staff, and that does not bode a feeling of welcomeness. There are language barriers, and so even if they are able to be in the NICU, they may not be able to build that connection with the NICU staff because they can't communicate at their own will, or that may even just portend a sense of that I'm not as accepted in the NICU because they don't speak my language. I mean, there's all sorts of barriers in that way as well. And then there's the larger ones, right, that are societally based, that in our country, we don't have reliable access to healthcare and in terms of a universal healthcare, and that families have differing levels of access in regards to that, and certainly the lack of adequate parental leave in our country without any sort of mandate there really can impact a child and a family. Especially if, again, my child was only in NICU for 2 weeks, but I only had, I had 8 weeks of maternity leave, sort of. I had 4 weeks of leave and like 4 weeks of vacation and sick leave, but I could cobble together 8 weeks, but 2 of it was in the NICU. But imagine if many children, like Nicole's son, was in the NICU much longer than 2 weeks. And so you're going to go through any sort of maternity or paternity leave that you might have because there's no sort of federal policy or mandate that supports parents in these situations.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of what Kerri said. There's, like she mentioned, I mean, William was in the NICU for 91 days, but a lot of babies that were born at his gestation really would be there for 120, plus more days. And so as she touched on for leave, I spent the first 2 months, for my 12 weeks, I spent the first 2 months with him. Then I actually went back to work in July and worked in the NICU. He was a patient. And then, when he came home in August, then I took my last 4 weeks. And so, but, I was able to do that. I had the flexibility, but again, a lot of people don't. And just like Kerri said, there's a lot of parents that are either threatened that they're going to lose their job, or they just flat out do lose their job. And so they have that struggle of, do I have income or do I come see my baby? And I think a lot of times too, once these parents can't be there because they have to work, or if they have other children at home, they almost get a target on them that they're not here, they're never here. And so when they do come, they are not included in the camps like they should be, because somebody's like, well, she's never here. Well, does it mean that we shouldn't, give her the time and the energy to involve her and get her back engaged whenever she actually is there? I think that's a big part of it too. And, sadly, just even transportation, like Kerri touched on, I've worked in smaller, level ones where I've had to, transport a baby like an hour and a half away, and the mother has no way to get there. And even the hospital sadly didn't have a way to get. And there's been more than once that I said, I will pay for her Uber, I don't know if that's okay, but I can't do that all the time. And so there's got to be a way, just better ways to be able to support these families, because yes, there's, transportation issues and then other children at home. And, it's very difficult for these families.
Yeah. It really underlies how, just how complex and how multi-layered, this issue is of family presence, parental presence in the NICU. And there are, so many different aspects to look at and try to mitigate or support. And it really, I think, to me, really speaks to the importance of the work that the Family Centered Care Task Force is doing, is that it's not just about being family centered at the bedside, but it's also about advocating about, the barriers that keep families from being at the bedside. And that's one of the things I think that you two really have been spearheading for the task force is how can we make this possible? How can we make this the standard, that parents are there, that they're welcome? And there's a lot of different routes that I think advocacy takes. You guys had drafted a resolution with the AAP. Was it last year? I think that it was submitted. So just tell us a little bit about kind of some of those avenues of advocacy that I didn't know as a parent advocate that was a thing, that an AAP resolution was a thing, but could be very important and impactful. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
You want me to start, Nicole? The AAP, as most people probably know, is a large organization that does a lot of advocacy work to help inform health policy for children, to really help improve the health of children and families. And how they prioritize kind of their advocacy efforts, whether it's like in the legislative world, because they go to Washington, they work with lawmakers and lobbyists and everything to try to advance agendas to improve children's health. But also they have funding access and things like that. So how they strategize their priorities is they have this annual leadership conference, and anyone who's affiliated with the AAP can put forth ideas essentially in the form of what they call a resolution, which is kind of a templated document to say, hey, this should be a priority for the AAP. And that helps kind of get the issue on their agenda. There's a voting base, a subset within the AAP that kind of discusses it live in a forum in the summer. And there's also ways for all members to vote on these issues to kind of help drive where it should fall in the AAP's priorities as they're building their strategic plans. And so that was one idea that Nicole and I had after I heard her. It really was just a year ago. It's surprising to me that I've only known her for a year. But it feels like it's been a lot longer because we've worked together so closely since then. But so we put that forward. We decided in the end that we wanted to try to broaden it beyond just the NICU, because we know that this is an issue that impacts families of all ages and when they come back to the hospital for care, or even if it's just an older child that comes to the hospital for care for the first time and knew they face similar issues. Plus, we wanted to try to gain broader support within the whole AAP community, not just the sliver of people that care about NICU care, which is just a subset. So we broadened it to be to try to advocate for parents being essential caregivers across pediatrics, which, again, in principle, I think no one disagrees with. However, it actually, and I was not there at the conference, Nicole represented us when she comes back on. Hopefully she can talk a little bit about it, but there was discussion about specifically the adolescent population. And that is again, something that we in the NICU world don't think about or talk about very often, but as I now have teenage daughters, I am learning more and more about their, when they get engaged in their healthcare and where are their rights in terms of deciding care for themselves and privacy and all of those adolescent issues. And so, and Nicole, I was just talking about the resolution last year and how it kind of ran into issue. There was a lot of discussion about that particular segment. In the end, it didn't pass, which is somewhat atypical because usually things pass. Because it's all supported, you've done all this pre-work and met with people initially. It's just how high it falls in the ranking system of passing. But it actually did not pass because of the concern. They thought it was too broad. That there are situations where maybe parents, I don't know if limited is the right word. I wasn't there, so I don't want to misspeak either. Again, always my belief that everybody is well-intended in trying to do the right thing for children of all ages and adolescents of all ages. But I think that is what kind of struck them. And they felt that there are situations where families diverge from the individual patient's perspective as that child is old enough to make those decisions. And you can imagine, I don't think we need to go into that here, but all those situations where that could be a situation, right? Whether it's, let's just say birth control for a teenage child, like there are some situations where that teenager may be ready to make those decisions on their own and the parents may disagree. And so that is one example where maybe parents would potentially be limited. So anything to add to that, Nicole? I know you might have missed some of what I said. But.
Yes. So I presented, the resolution and there were definitely concerns like Kerri brought up, and it was disappointing that it didn't get passed because, again, it's something I'm so passionate about. And like Kerri mentioned, we, put a lot of time into doing that. And we considered trying to resubmit it again this year. And again, I think we hit some barriers and just felt like we needed to kind of veer our path. And there was a lot of other advocacy work that we could do with the Family Centered Care Task Force, NICU Parent Network. And so, and also the present study, we talked about working with them. And so our next, kind of biggest passion is we are considering trying to do a checklist, and the present study, I think, is going to be published, it sounds like. And so we wanted to work alongside with them and take everything that they have and, try to put it into a checklist that we could actually offer, NICUs globally to have to try again to support parental presence and not have them ever have to, leave the baby's bedside, especially by a forced rule. So we'll continue to do our advocacy work and try to make a difference where we can, and maybe submit a resolution or something elsewhere at a different time.
It is. Oh, go ahead, Gigi.
And this is fascinating. I mean, I was just thinking sort of about priorities and what would be the next step. So you'd already talking about that, because it's, although I'm from the US, I haven't lived in the US for a long time, and I'm based in Europe, and now I have my child in Europe, and it was a completely different experience. Nothing about insurance, nothing about, my son was in hospital, he was 24-weeker, was in his hospital for almost 6 months. But I think it is something to what both of you are saying, is this idea of we have to start almost before we even get to the NICU, having these conversations. And so that's where that trajectory begins. It's even before we even get into the healthcare. What are the ways? We can try our hardest, but we can't change all of the social sort of ills, but it is about how do we begin to have those conversations? And I guess what comes out when you were both talking was, who do we have them with? Because we don't have a universal health care in the US. It's always wondering, who do we go to? And so I'm really fascinated to hear about what FCC sort of, you talked about working with AAP, and sort of what other, I guess the query is, what other what is the word I'm looking for? Not voices, but what other people and organizations are you looking to have those conversations with? Because I think it is something about, that continuum is before, during, and then after, and we're kind of having that. I mean, are you looking at, because I'm thinking, like, even what you were talking about, Nicole, that there are so many things that's already happening globally around, like, around these issues. And what would you think would be maybe the priorities for the US with making sure that we get that kind of traction going, and on a continual basis? You might be already doing it, but it's just wondering about the priorities.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I know we're talking a lot about the problems, but just to balance it, there are so many incredible people that are working on all sorts of aspects of these issues across the country at every level, locally at their own centers, nationally with the legislators, and everywhere in between. Some people focused on babies, some people focused on the teenager needs, and everything in between. People focused on the mental health aspect, people focused on the social influencers of health aspect. So there are so many people, I don't want to sell anyone short. And there are, again, so many various things that are ongoing that I really am very optimistic that with time, things are going to change. The bigger issues of things like paid leave are the things that I'm more worried about. But there are many organizations that really do a lot of advocacy well beyond the AAP that are working on those issues. There are certainly segments within the AAP. I mean, I work with, and another stream of my work, I actually do a lot of things to support the workforce to try to help them be healthier so they can make babies healthier. And that is one of the issues that we're tackling in kind of other forms, just within our little nugget of the neonatology world. But again, people are working on that at a very broad level. I think as far as the social influencers of health and some of those things we talked about, the challenges that families face, and especially our families who have already been marginalized in many ways, there's a whole bunch of people working on those types of issues through various research, quality improvement initiatives, all sorts of efforts to target, equity, diversity, inclusion efforts. And again, that you would have to have a whole week worth of talks to really understand all the amazing work that some people are doing and contributing to the care of infants in that stream. I think for Nicole and I, in our little piece of trying to kind of focus on this presence in the NICU, we, like she mentioned, we're working on trying to build this checklist or toolkit that can then be shared throughout our FCC task force forum, because that's a great, there's over 800 or 900 people now.
Over 1,000 now.
1,000. I mean, I can't even
over 1,000.
She just flashed the latest numbers at the meeting. Keira's obviously one of the executive directors for that, so she knows the details better than I. But hopefully that as we build this, and we're going to work with Malati, put us in touch with the directors of the Presence Study, which is a study that listed. They did all this work to develop a set of recommendations through kind of like a rigorous methodology to inform us all. And so we're going to work with them to try to build that out into a toolkit, so it's in a usable format for centers across the US that they can work. Because a lot of this stuff has to happen locally. Even if there's national advocacy, at the end of the day, it's that hospital that has to change their policy has to somehow come up with the financial support to improve parent transportation access, or whatever the issue might be. We're going to.
I think that'll be. Oh, I was just going to say that'll be great. And Gigi, that is going to be a collaboration with Fabiana with the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. So I love that it's a, even it's across the border, collaboration to work on that, working with them from the study that they did, and then creating a checklist that will be able to be shared very widely, I think is, it's exciting.
Yeah, and that's really, really great, because that was my query is like, what can we do? What can our members do to support that? And then what kind of, because we always talk about with these talks is having a takeaway, and then knowing, so that's so exciting to know that there is a checklist that's in the works that our members can, once it's out there, be able to either be aware of or know about, or their hospitals know about. And then, like you said, it's that local changing, those relationships and, things that are shifting. And that's where organically you begin to see a wider and wider and wider shift. So that's really, what's the timing on that? Is that's as far as what you're thinking to have it this year, or?
The present study officially finished their study and I've seen like that. I don't know how widely it's shared, but there's like they've made a beautiful infographic that talks about their recommendations and how they did their study. And I know she said I think in like the last 2 weeks, the paper was accepted for publication. So that will be out and available soon. And so we're going to start to convene this summer on building that toolkit. It may not be ready by the end of the year. I mean, I'd love to be optimistic, but things always take longer when you have a bunch of volunteer efforts to kind of work through these things. But I think,
and I love that you guys, as the co-chairs of the advocacy committee, are really looking at these tangible ways to make that local, at the bedside, on the ground difference. Because I think that, as a kind of a parent advocate, we see studies, we see lists of recommendations, but then how does it get to the bedside?
Yeah,
and then even with things that we've been involved in, like for example, the psychosocial guidelines for NICU families that we worked on with NPA, it was really important that we not just publish the recommendations, but that we add an entire online course on, okay, here's how you do it. So I really love that, that the components of this giant social and medical issue that you guys are focusing on really are going to have some tangible differences that will be made, very quickly. I think, at least quickly, when you think about how long things take in healthcare.
Right. And I think I shared with both of you in a meeting, but at Graven's just this last March, I was listening to something, and they were talking about neurodevelopmental care and small baby unit, but just in general, she said, even if you have a checklist, and it doesn't matter if your checklist is perfect, but as long as you have something that your unit is trying to follow, that people are more likely then to follow it versus not having a checklist or something that people look at. And we can always tweak it and improve it, but that's the beauty, I think, of the Family Center Care Task Force, is there's so many members that obviously are still on the front lines of the hospital that can hopefully take this, and like you said, as a tangible thing, take it back to their units and put it into place, hopefully, and like I said, make a difference.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I would say, we always talk about, like Gigi said, wanting to have takeaways. And so if we're looking at a community-based organization, what can they do? Certainly, I think joining the FCC task force is one thing, so that what's happening and that you're a part of those, you're able to be a part of those discussions, those webinars, join the advocacy committee, if that's something that you're passionate about. And what other ideas do you have for that community-based engagement?
First of all, I think a lot of it is keep doing what you guys are doing. I mean, NPN is just a wonderful organization. And from what I know of it, so many of the organizations that fall within your umbrella organization are doing exactly that. I mean, a lot of them, I know, provide kind of this direct support for families in tangible format to be present, right? Like whether it's gas money, like things like that I know. So keep doing what you're doing. I think other things you can do locally are to keep asking, like, what is the policy here? And, find your ally at your local hospital and see, is there a family-centered care committee? Is there a patient family experience council? They're called different things in different places, and they have different structures in different places. And maybe it's one person and maybe it's a suite of 30 people, it just depends, but ask who the players are. And if there's not one, or it seems small, ask how you can engage with that, because those are the right places to get in locally to drive the change. And then use that forum to feed from what you're learning in places like the FCC, and use the resources. I mean, the FCC task force, I should say, has just so many wonderful resources, and whether it's from the webinars and what people are learning and sharing knowledge in those spaces, or whether it's the other resources, or they do polls to collect how things are done in other places, and you can learn how do you get a paid parent role in your hospital, right, to support families. And there have, that is a form where people have shared job postings. And so like, okay, if you're going to try to advocate for this at hospital B, learn how hospital A did it and borrow their job posting. And so I think, yes, joining the FCC task force or engaging with them more fully can really give you a lot of ideas and knowledge that then you can bring back once you kind of identify your players and really work with them in your local centers.
about you, Nicole? Do you have any recommendations? Because you kind of, you cover so many aspects of this, as with your empowering NICU parents organization and podcast. You're a NICU mom. You're in the unit as a healthcare professional. So would love to hear your ideas. Oh, but you're muted.
Oh, I'm not, but if
There you go.
I might be frozen again.
You're good.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
That, you may try to do things as an individual, but just almost like Kerri said, try to build a team, try to find people that believe strongly in, what we're trying to do in parental engagement and their presence as much as you can. And, then where you can make a difference. And, like Kerri said, there's a lot of units that have parent advisor, family council, and those are also really important too, because when you have parents at the table, whether it's for general discussions or even like Vaughn is very much into having a parent at the table, and so go to all meetings, and just having that parental aspect will really help make the team, whether it's nurses or providers, it helps them think a little bit, because again, like you don't know unless you have actually been through it as a NICU parent. So I encourage people to continue doing what they're doing. It takes a village for sure to try to educate people. And like you mentioned, the webinars are free and they are very educational, and they, remind the importance of family-centered care or family integrated care. And, like I said, I just keep trying to educate people as much as I can, and, do podcasts on it. And, we know how much engagement, like we talked about earlier on, just the positive impacts of it. And, just like I said, small changes hopefully will make big changes eventually.
Well, thank you so much. I think this has been just a wonderful discussion. I think we could, just continue the discussion for several more hours or days, because there is so much to it. But Gigi, do you have any final thoughts before we end?
Yeah, we need a part 2 for this one as well. I was just thinking, I mean, what's come out has been, like you've hit on, Keira, the multidimensional and multifactorial part of it. So we can't oversimplify that. There's so much to be done, but also to what you, Kerri, said, is people already doing it as well. There's good work already happening. And it's something about, through discussions like these, letting people be aware of that, and then knowing how they can be a part of those solutions, and how collectively we can begin to kind of make those changes. So I think that's, it's brilliant to know that work is already being done, but how do we even further impact that, and bring all those voices along with us? So all those voices of parents that we haven't heard from, and don't feel empowered, how do we ensure that they are also a part of that trajectory of change? And so I just want to thank the two of you for your insight and wisdom, and for your passion in bringing it to the table. I think we just need to continue to have these kind of discussions, and getting our members involved, being aware that this happens, and get them involved in the change as well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you guys so much. This has really been wonderful, and excited to see what continues to happen with the advocacy committee for the task force and the present study. I think there's lots of good on the horizon for everybody. So with that, we're going to unfortunately have to say goodbye to everybody. But I do just want to again thank you, Nicole and Kerri, and of course my fabulous co-host Gigi for being here today to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you
so
everyone
much for having us.
Yeah, this was really, really enjoyable speaking with you guys. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So I also want to say a thank you to everybody today for joining us. We really are intentional in our efforts to make participating in our educational offerings as simple as possible. So please make sure that you mark your calendars for what we have coming up throughout the rest of the month. We do have that members only leadership lounge. So if you are an NPN member and want to learn about how to do some creative fundraising, we definitely want you to join that leadership lounge coming up on the 18th. And then we will also be doing a special segment on PTSD in the NICU journey. You can always find our upcoming and past recordings on our website at www.NICUparentnetwork.org, and of course, always on our Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn pages. So thank you all so much. Thank you for the work you do, and we'll see you next time.